Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The First Branch. Tonight, we're going to take on the medical care system, and we're going to look at some of the factors that have been affecting the failure of our medical care system here in America. We're going to take a look at how to solve those problems. We're going to frame these problems correctly by placing them in their context. And we're going to talk about the principles that we should be following and we should be implementing in order to have a more efficient and effective medical care system that actually does answer the question, can we provide medical care for every single American? And the answer to that question is yes. We just got to place our efforts inside of a mechanism that allows us to use our resources in a much more effective manner. And so the way we're going to do that is tonight we're going to talk about a brief history of our medical care system since the Pilgrims first started landing there on Plymouth Rock. We're going to talk about both the liberal and Republican view and the conservative view on healthcare and what each of the predominant parties believe on medical care. And then we're going to talk about what they do right and what they do wrong. What does the right believe and what's right about what the right believes, and what does the left believe, and then what's right about what the left believes, as well as the things that we do wrong. You know, there are things we do right, but there are things we do wrong, and we need to stop perpetuating the behavior that leads us to failure. We need to start implementing procedures and practices that are going to lend itself to a successful medical care industry. And so we want to talk about the good and the bad and then get rid of the bad. And then we want to discuss those mechanisms that are going to allow us to take our resources and use them effectively. One of the things I kind of wanted to be reminded of this week is something that President Kennedy said. Let us not seek the Republican answer or the Democratic answer, but let us seek the right answer. And that's important to remind ourselves of, that we need to not worry about party politics, what the right believes, what the left believes, and then it become a divisive issue that if you don't believe everything that's on the left, you become some evil human being, or if you don't believe everything that's on the right, you're somehow some evil human being. This divisive stance that we take, especially concerning healthcare, because it is such a vital service that is provided to the American people. How we care for each other is extremely important. And I want to highlight the fact that there are ways to care for one another in a very compassionate way, but a very effective and efficient way, because we have limited resources. And so we're going to talk about how to use those resources in an efficient manner that allow us to provide medical care for all. When settlers first began arriving to the New World, they did not bring with them medical professionals. Much of the early medical care was provided by local experts within the community. Throughout the colonial times, if you had an ailment or injury, you would see someone from the local community that had expertise in treating that particular issue. Much of the home remedies for common ailments were treated by the mothers of the community. This would be the standard practice until the formation of the first medical society established in Boston in 1735. A few years later, Boston would also see the establishment of the first general hospital here in America. It took almost 300 years to see real progress in medical care in the New World. It would take another 100 years before the formation of the American Medical Association. This would be the first real attempt at widespread standardization throughout the industry. Yet comprehensive services would not be made available until the Civil War. It is during this war that the U.S. Army began building hospitals in every state. While these efforts provided standardization of practice, it did not provide access to medical care that one might need. Then just prior to World War II, President Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act of 1935. This act increased care to the poor and the elderly, but there were still many able-bodied workers who did not have access to needed medical care. Then came the day which would live in infamy, December 7th, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor. This event was instrumental in disrupting the socialist agenda of President Roosevelt by creating a boom in manufacturing jobs to support the war effort. One of the side effects of this boom was the creation of the employer-supported healthcare system. This is the system that we still have here today in America. Every administration since Roosevelt, whether Republican or Democrat, has sought to expand the reach and cost of medical care and Social Security by merely throwing more monetary resources at the problem. The result of this in modern times? The Affordable Care Act saw as much as 100% increases in premiums in some cases. The left certainly isn't shy about admitting it has a socialist view on healthcare. They want a high tax rate to ensure medical care is free for everyone. They want everyone to pay their fair share. And if we don't want to pay, then they preach at us from a standpoint of guilt. If you don't want to pay your fair share of taxes to ensure that everyone has free medical care, it's only because you're evil and you don't really care about people. After all, Jesus really was a socialist. And they try to claim this because Jesus spoke about caring for the poor. And I'm actually going to address this topic later on tonight. Conservatives are capitalists, and they believe that capitalism is the only way to ensure rates stay competitive amongst the healthcare providers. They say it improves the quality of medical care and then reinforces freedom of choice. What they fail to see is that most of the medical care here in America is not on a freedom of choice basis. Most people don't choose to get cancer. They don't choose to get hit by a drunk driver or be shot in some random drive-by. And I can guarantee you, no one has ever said this: I hope to get a heart attack now because dang, them rates are low. There are hundreds of thousands of examples of people having medical issues that are thrust upon them by measures outside of their control. I can choose what television I want to buy. You get to choose what dealership you want to go to buy a car. When someone has a heart attack, they are rushed to the nearest hospital. They don't negotiate for the most affordable hospital services in the area. These are not just simple items. These are important facts to understand about what makes up our healthcare industry. Where the left fails is in their lack of understanding of the limited resource of capital. They continue to errantly think that if we just increase taxes, then logically we'll have more money. They don't seem to realize that the more tax you impose on people, the greater the strain on the economy as a whole. Taxing the rich out of their wealth doesn't make the poor rich. It just makes the rich poor. If what you want is an equal footing of poverty, then I'll admit you're on the right track. Both sides live in half-truths, and it is in these half-truths they set themselves up as the moral victors. These half-truths are: caring for the poor demonstrates your compassion. Capitalism creates capital, and capital is what it takes to fund programs. But the sheer nature of medical care cannot be completely seen as an openly competitive free market. Jesus was not a socialist, but he did demand that we care for the poor. What's more is he actually gave us a blueprint on exactly how to do it. So you guessed it, we're going to go to the Bible to look at that example. The first example we see on how to care for the poor is in Deuteronomy chapter 24. Here we're given the example of the gleaning of the fields, when, during the harvest, the farmers were told only to glean their fields once. If they had left anything behind, they were not allowed to turn back and then go pick it up. They were to leave it for the fatherless, the widow, and the foreigner. You see, we're already starting to see the heart of God as he tells us how to care for those less fortunate. The second example we see is in Leviticus chapter 19. The Lord restates what he had said back in Deuteronomy, but then expands the scope to care for the poor. He also expands the requirement. In this passage of Scripture, farmers were told to deliberately leave the corners of their fields unharvested for the express purpose of feeding the poor. Then he explains why he wanted them to do this. Because they were once in bondage. They once were a people who didn't even have a country. Now that God has given them the increase, he explains why he wants them to give to the poor, to remind them that God himself is the one that gave the increase in the first place. So if the increase comes from God, then I must trust he has a plan for it. As a Christian, I accept this. But these examples also serve to prove that Jesus really isn't a socialist. God didn't ask farmers to give up 75%, 35%, or even 25%. And there's also a shared responsibility. The poor had to go to the farms and harvest the remaining crops. They had an effort and a cost to this process as well. This particular aspect is going to become extremely important later on in the episode. Then, like I said in last week's episode, I'll always give you these truths in natural law as well. I'm going to give you a biblical example, but I also want to show you how God's written truth is also demonstrated in the law that he's created. Again, I'm not asking you to convert to Christianity. So I want to show you in natural law how these principles can be successfully applied while still maintaining separation of church and state. So the area of science that we see, though, that principle of gleaning the field demonstrated in natural law is in the process of diffusion. And diffusion is just a simple process by which matter moves from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. I know everybody's going to be thinking, man, this guy is nuts. We got some guy talking about solving political problems and he's doing science projects in the middle of his presentation. Because it's important to understand, I've given you a biblical principle, and I'm trying to show you how that biblical principle applies in the natural world, and then how we can take that demonstrated principle in the natural world and use it and insert that into practice as we try to figure out how to take resources from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration and diffuse them along a concentration gradient so that we can use that money or those resources more effectively. Because we're not just talking about money, are we? We're talking about other resources. We're talking about the resources that the services provide, the medical services, what doctors provide, what nurses provide. And so, and it's also the services that our employers provide by providing the medical care itself. So we're talking about taking resources from an area of higher concentration, moving them down a concentration gradient to an area of lower concentration. And so we're going to apply that principle, and something's going to be demonstrated. There's going to be a demonstrated rule in all of this. And so how this experiment works is you take two glasses. Now, how I've always seen it done, I've seen it done a few times in high school, in our not just high school, but I think the first time I did an experiment like this, I was in sixth grade physical science class, and first did this experiment. But we always did it with a glass of hot water and a glass of room temperature water. And the purpose of that experiment was to show how heat or friction can affect the diffusion process. But what I want to show you is the consistency of the diffusion process to demonstrate a rule. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a drop. So we've got 14 ounces. We've got two glasses. Each glass has 14 ounces of water. And each glass of water has been sitting here in this room at room temperature for the last 30 minutes. And so that's kind of our control here. But what I want to demonstrate it, and so what we're going to do is we're going to take one drop of food coloring and put it into the water. Just one drop. Hopefully I don't jack this up. So there's one drop. And there's a second drop in each of them. So the first thing you'll notice is that the drops automatically didn't even start to diffuse the exact same way. And that's going to be important to note. Now, the thing that I have always seen in every time that I've seen this done, so I've probably done this experiment in a classroom environment in the sixth grade, and then I did it again in ninth grade science. And what we've always showed in all of our illustrations and in the books that I've seen is that they'll illustrate it from two different perspectives using a beaker or a fish tank. But the illustration always shows that the dye is evenly distributed throughout the solution, whether that solution be in a fish tank or in a beaker. But as you can see here, that's simply not the case. We have two glasses of water, the control being that we have put them in the exact same environment with the exact same solution, and then we drop the drops, the food coloring in each one of the solutions, and then simply allow the diffusion process to happen naturally. But what you're going to see here is that along that concentration gradient, that it is not equal. There's not an equal percentage of blue across the entire concentration gradient. What that means is there are different levels of dye throughout the solution. There are different levels of dye throughout each glass. All things being equal, even the percentages of dye on each molecule do not diffuse evenly across the concentration gradient. This is an important concept to understand. And I've never seen this discussed, and I'll have to admit, even growing up and going to science classes, I never even bothered to ask the question because I always accepted the illustration that was in front of me. The illustration of the fish tank being completely, the dye being completely consumed evenly across the concentration gradient. And that's not the case. What we see here is that there are different percentages of dye on different molecules throughout the entire solution. So what that led me to discover is that the shared percentage rule. That means the dye isn't shared evenly. There is a different percentage of dye throughout the entire solution, and yet the entire glass is affected. That means if I stick my straw in there, anywhere in this glass, even in the light areas, and I begin to drink, I'm still going to drink some blue dye. No matter what, even in this glass, if I go to the middle of this glass and off to the side, I'm still going to drink blue solution. If you disagree with me and you don't think this is correct, then I challenge you to take a glass of water and pour just a drop of arsenic in it, and then the area where you see the arsenic drop, put a straw anywhere else in that glass and drink from it, and I promise you'll be affected. That's the proof of the shared percentage rule. And I've not seen that discussed anywhere else in science. I haven't seen it in any science books because it always says the same thing, that it moves across it evenly. But look at this experiment on YouTube and you'll see the same thing. You'll see scientists stand at a desk and they'll drop the blue dye and the red dye, or they'll use green and blue, whatever dye color that they use, and it will never diffuse evenly throughout the entire solution. There will always be a percentage difference throughout the concentration gradient. This was significant, and I never bothered to ask the question when I was seeing these demonstrations. But as I was looking at, as I was reading through the scriptures, and I apologize. And I read through Deuteronomy and I read through Leviticus. I'm like, all right, so how does this apply to the natural world? If I'm going to be committed to the scriptures, but I also believe that God has demonstrated every law that he's ever revealed to us in natural law, I wanted to see where that was. And so I started digging through like diffusion, dilutions, anything that had to do with variables in solutions. I really wanted to understand that, because what we're talking about here is we're talking about taking a resource. We're talking about diffusing it across an environment where it needs to be, where we always assume that it needed to be done equally. And we see that in, man, I apologize. I'm fighting a cold. But I'm going to get through this because this information is important. And, the liberals have always said we want the fair share, that we want the rich to pay their fair share. We want everybody to pay their fair share so that we can get health care for all, that Medicare for all concept. But as we look at this process, so let's just say, let's use these two glasses, all right? And we see that the need, that's everything. That's everything all of our resources can provide, and that's the need. So the water represents the need, right? And so the concentration gradient is all of those medical providers, the people that use the system, the employers, the federal government, all those things that we're going to ask to take the resource of capital and the resource of services and then funnel those resources through. That would be the concentration gradient. And so the blue dye represents all of those resources. So you have the resource, which is the blue dye, you have the need, which is the water, and then you have the mechanism that is going to support those resources, or it's going to diffuse those resources. Well, it can't be equitable. There's nothing in natural law that says that there is going to be an equitable distribution through the solution to ensure that the resources are divided equally. And we're talking about the resource of effort as well. As we saw demonstrated in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, the poor had to go to the farms. The farmers didn't reap the fields for them. And God didn't demand that 75%, 20, even 25% of what they had earned be given to the poor and to the needy. So we're already starting to see in natural law how the socialist idea of what the liberals have come up with is errant, but where they're right is in understanding that God has demanded that we show compassion to the less fortunate. But it does require capitalism. I am a capitalist for this reason. Capitalism is the means by which we can afford to do these things. It is the greater resource that we have available to us to diffuse in that glass full of need. And God is demanding. I'm a Christian. I want to serve the Lord. I want to demonstrate the love of Christ in the behaviors that in the way that I act. And so if I'm asking you to trust me to solve, look, I want to solve this problem. And so I'm looking to both the Bible and natural law to provide a way to solve this problem. You see, we looked to politicians. They couldn't do it. That's why I wanted to discuss the history of this first. We looked to the politicians. We've looked to the medical field. We've looked to economists. And they've all failed. Almost 500, I guess, no, 400 years. 400 years they've tried to solve this problem and haven't. We've had politicians do it. They failed. Let's stop looking to politicians to solve this. This problem is not an economic one. It is not a medical one. It's not a political one. It is a scientific one and can be solved scientifically. I believe that our God has created nature and nature's laws. I believe that the answers, any answer that we seek, can be found in natural law. And I am all for taking the language of nature, which is math, and then applying that math to a solution. And that's what we're going to do on Friday. So I told you today was going to be all about setting everything up to describe how I came to the conclusion that I came to write the legislation that is going to be successful in providing medical care for all. We're not talking about free medical care. We're talking about medical care for all. We're talking about a shared responsibility across the concentration gradient. And that shared responsibility isn't equitable. It has to be diffused in a shared percentage manner. And there are going to be individuals that have to share more financially. There's going to have to be individuals that share more by way of effort. There's going to have to be individuals that share more by both. They're going to be required to be both people who spend as well as put forth effort. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'm going to break all of those subcategories down mathematically on Friday. I'm excited about this. This is an exciting time. I know it seems crazy. But the only thing that's crazy is when you continue to look at the same people for the same answer, yet they continue to fail. We've continued to look at politicians, and they've continued to fail us. We've continued to look at the medical personnel. There's value added, and we're going to see the value added in the coordination piece that we talk about on Friday, that they're going to have to provide for this. That's part of that shared responsibility. Look, even as I discuss it, you're starting to see the diffusion process, even that concentration gradient, even begin to shift and become more concentrated in certain areas. You're seeing this shift in the percentages as well. And we're going to see that shift in percentages throughout a taxation cycle. Yep, there's going to be taxes involved. Yep, there's going to be effort involved. But it's nowhere near what the liberals have proposed, and it is 1,000 times more compassionate than what capitalists. I'm a capitalist. I am a capitalist. But I do not believe that I get to earn capital in order to rob others of the things that God has blessed me with. And I'm going to show us how we can do that responsibly in legislation to ensure that every single person has the ability to pay for medical care. That's the answer. It's not free medical care for all. It's medical care that is affordable and yet remains competitive, using the capitalist idea to support a very needed social program. I'm excited about this. And this is exciting times. I'm excited about sharing with you the math behind all of this. I know this seems crazy to talk about diffusion and all these things. Like, how is this going to help? I'm going to show you. I've given you the principle. Now I'm going to in practice show you. I'm going to do something that no politician has the courage to do, that no economist has ever had the courage to do. We are going to go line by line, dollar by dollar. We're going to go category by subcategory, and we are going to break it down to the dollar amounts that will be earned and be spent. We're going to talk about the caveats that should be written into the law to prevent congressional overreach or prevent Congress from stealing the money to use it in another place. We're going to go through all of that. And I'm excited about Friday's episode. So if you're excited about learning how to solve this problem, about becoming part of the solution and not the problem, please tune in on Friday's episode at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to show you just how is it easy? It'll look easy in math terms, but it's going to require effort. The effort from every single American to literally pull the weight they're required to pull across the concentration gradient to ensure that we can diffuse those resources so that everybody has access to it. They'll be accessed at different points. I'll give you one example real quick, just to kind of give you a little teaser trailer. All right, I'm a relatively healthy man. We don't have a lot of from my family tree on both my mom's side of the family and my dad's side of the family. We don't have historical health problems. And so as I anticipate that I am not going to be going into hospital care for heart disease and things of that nature. It's not something that's part of our family's medical history. And so because of that, the chances of me ever using a catastrophic healthcare platform or something that a platform that I'm going to need to save my life over long term, like suffering from cancer or anything of that nature, is slim to none. So I'll pay into a program, but I'll use less of the resource. And so I'm paying into something I most likely will not use. But here's the trick. Here's the difference between what we're doing now and what my proposed plan is. It is this. There is a 98% decrease in the amount spent on that exact same service that I may never use. Yes, you heard that right. A 98% decrease in expenditure. I'm telling you, I know you don't believe me. I know I didn't believe it. I was so afraid that I was wrong that I ran the numbers at least 10 times, at least, probably more, because I did not think it was correct. But I checked my work and checked my work and checked my work because I did not believe it. When I looked at the number, I said, this can't be right. This can't be right. Economists haven't figured this out. Politicians, I'm not the smartest. I don't have a team. I don't have 1,000 people on staff here. It was just me with a piece of paper, a pencil, a calculator. Yeah, I used to calculate. Those numbers get pretty big when you're talking about billions of dollars worth of taxes and trillions of dollars worth of taxes. So yeah, I did use a calculator, but I did the math. I did the work. And what I want to share with you is what I found, what I discovered. And I discovered we've been doing it inefficiently. We haven't been doing it wrong. And I'll explain to you on Friday that this shared percentage rule has already been implemented in the United States in our healthcare system. And I'll explain to you on Friday. That's kind of how I'll introduce the episode on Friday. I'll talk about how we've already been introducing this. And it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be a wonderful explanation of how we can successfully provide medical care for all. And we're going to do it without taxing the rich out of their wealth, and we're going to do it in a way that provides everybody the ability to pay into a healthcare system that remains competitive where it needs to remain competitive, and where it needs to be compassionate where it needs to be compassionate. But we can also be compassionate through the competitiveness, and we'll discuss all of that, and I'll lay all of that out on Friday. I look forward to seeing you on Friday. If these videos interest you, even if they don't interest you, even if you're absolutely confused by them and I'm a horrible presenter, what I'm going to ask you to do is click that subscribe button and click that bell notification so that you're alerted to when we post new content. So I'm excited about it. Yep, these are crazy thoughts. These are crazy ideas. And the only reason that they're crazy is because nobody's presented them before. I didn't invent this. I just discovered it. And that's a significant thing. And I want to share that with people because I'm excited about it. And I know that when you get excited about something, I love it when I'm around excited people. I love it when I'm around people who are excited about what they're excited about. It makes me excited about what they're excited about for. So let's get excited about solving this problem because it's going to blow you away just how much money we've been spending errantly because our resources are just inside a mechanism that's inefficient because it doesn't take into account the shared percentage rule because it doesn't apply the principles of diffusion. So again, if this content is interesting to you, if you like it, please hit that subscribe button, click that bell notification so that you're notified of when we post new content. But just as a reminder, our scheduled content is going to be Mondays and Fridays, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you again for taking the time to watch this video, and God bless.